it comes to where and how immigrants are held after they're arrested for alleged immigration violations, you've no doubt heard of some of the more well-known facilities. There was the Alligator Alcatraz in Florida. It is officially closed now, by the way. In Colorado, the best known is the Geo Detention Center in Aurora. But as you might imagine, there are many, many more, and of all sizes. And some aren't even called detention facilities. They're called hold rooms. And hold rooms, including several in Colorado, are very problematic. And they are the focus of this episode of Faithful Resistance. We're speaking with someone who's made it her business to find out all about them. Today, we welcome back the statewide coordinator of Colorado's immigrant partnership teams, Jenna McAfee. Thanks for coming back, Jenna. You've had a very busy summer. But heaven knows, and when it comes to immigration issues, there's plenty to keep you occupied probably every hour of the day. So we wanted to ask you, because we know you know a lot about hold rooms. And as a person who's watched a million cop shows on TV, I think of a holding cell, but I'm not sure it's quite the same. So what is an immigration hold room?
An immigration hold room is a place where immigrants are held temporarily after they're arrested. And theoretically, they're supposed to be held no more than 12 hours before they're transferred to an actual detention facility.
Now, you said theoretically. I take it that means that the theory is not the reality. What is it really?
That's correct. We've done a lot of research into the history of these hold rooms, and they were established in the 2003, 2004, during the George W. Bush administration. And during that time frame, they were used. People were held there a few hours, which is the way they were set up. They're specifically, by policy, not supposed to have beds. But what we found is since the Trump administration, the second Trump administration started, people have been held in these hold rooms sometimes for over a month in a place that's clearly designed not to hold people for that long. So that's why I say theoretically.
Well, I'd read that they not only are supposed to not have beds, some of them don't even have toilets.
Yes, we haven't found any that don't have toilets, but what we have found, for instance, there's a hold room facility in Centennial, Colorado. There are two big rooms that are set up, one of them that could hold 35 people, another one that could hold more than that. There's one toilet in that hold room for everybody to use. So it's completely inadequate. Access to bathrooms, there are no kitchens, again, no beds. There are concrete benches in these hold rooms. People are, we have heard stories of people who have not had any food or water when they've been held. It's pretty dismal conditions for the immigrants who are in these facilities.
Let's talk specifically about Colorado. How many of these hold rooms are there? How many were they designed to hold? How many are they really holding? Things like that.
We are aware of 8 hold rooms in Colorado, spread around the state. The only 3 that are in the Front Range are in Frederick, Centennial, and Fremont County, which is adjacent to Pueblo. But we have, the other 5 are on the western slope. And I've never calculated how many can be held in these hold rooms, but we know that in the Centennial hold room, 135 people were held there at one time. So there were 135 people crammed into those 2 rooms that I just described earlier. So it's pretty dismal conditions.
Why are they called hold rooms instead of detention facilities? Is there something, I'm reading something devious in that, but I'm not sure if I'm right.
No, I think you are right. ICE has standards that detention facilities are supposed to follow, including providing medical care, mental health care, access to legal counsel. These are for people in detention facilities. They have to provide beds for people. They have to provide nutritional food. And if it's something is a hold room, it doesn't have to comply with those detention facility standards. So we really think that that's one of the aims of ICE in holding people in, in these hold rooms. They don't have to meet any standards. People can be held for over a month with no access to legal counsel. We have heard stories of people being physically abused in these hold rooms, and that's, in a detention facility, that would be against the standards that ICE has set out. ICE also requires, or Congress actually requires, that ICE report regularly about actual detention facilities. Since these are not classified as detention facilities, they don't have to report anything to Congress about these rooms.
Was it like in March that several of the people from Colorado's congressional delegation tried to dig into this, tried to get some answers? Am I right? Did they get anywhere with that?
The answers, the information that we have been able to get about these hold rooms actually comes from, there's a group with UC Berkeley that has figured out how to get data from ICE. And they have been regularly suing through the Freedom of Information Act, ICE, to get data about how these hold rooms are being used. And that's our source of information. The data is actually very thorough. I mean, we know for each of the hold rooms, we know the gender of a person that's held there. We know when they were brought in. We know when they were released. We know what country they're from. We know their age. And this is all data from that deportation data project. So it's not data that ICE provided to the congressional staffers who have done oversight visits to at least some of these hold rooms. We are and one of the things that your viewers could consider doing, we are actively pushing the Senate, our senators and U.S. House representatives to go do oversight visits at these hold rooms, because the actual representatives can go unannounced. They can show up and say, I'm here for an oversight visit. If you're a staffer, you have to give notice. And what we've observed is that the hold rooms are clearly, we're aware of some instances where they've clearly been kind of sanitized for these visits. So, but if your viewers wanted to call the, congressional representatives directly and ask them to actually go to the hold rooms themselves rather than send a staffer, that would be something that we could do to try to get more oversight over what's actually happening.
So as far as you know, Congressman Neguse hasn't tried to go himself, or Brittany Pedersen hasn't tried to go herself. They send staff people.
That's correct.
Well, and think of the stories that we've heard about members of Congress trying to get into detention facilities, and they've been turned away. So
yes.
Do you know anybody who's actually been in one and can give you what you feel is objective, authentic observations about what it's like?
Well, the main thing we know, because there are 170 of these around the nation, every single state except West Virginia has hold rooms, and congressional representatives from other states have kind of forced their way into these facilities. And that's one of the ways we know of just horrible conditions. But none of these visits have happened in Colorado. We do know that the congressional staffers have gone to the facility in Centennial, which is the largest in Colorado. They set it up. I think they have to give at least 24 hours notice. So they're allowed in to see the, the physical facility. Usually there's, not very many people there when they come in, and they give kind of sanitized, what we consider to be sanitized responses to the questions that the staffers ask, talking about average stays instead of, which is kind of not a very good way to measure what's actually happening in these hold rooms instead of maximum. Like what is the maximum time that someone has been held here versus average?
Yeah,
So,
from the deportation data, have you gleaned what the longest stays in any of the Colorado hold rooms, and how bad can it get?
yeah, the deportation data project tells us that I believe this is two men from Nicaragua, were held in the Centennial hold room, one for 39 days and another one for 36 days. This is in a place that's all concrete, only has concrete benches, where lights are left on 24/7. We've heard varying accounts of the access to food and water. And we know that the bathroom situation, I consider to be completely insufficient. There are no showers. So anyway, these people were held over a month in that hold room. So yeah, we do have good data from the Deportation Data Project. We're waiting for another data dump from them because the last piece of data that we have goes through the first week of March. So we're anxious to see if there's been any changes now that there's more of a light shining on what is actually happening in these hold rooms.
When you ask questions about this, and certainly you must have, another similar organization must have said, we want to know what's going on and how you can possibly say that this is a legitimate use of these spaces. What's the answer? What's the press release say?
I mean, what happens, what DHS says is that the data from the Deportation Data Project is not correct.
Oh, of course.
That's what they say, is that that's not actually happening. But interestingly, when the professors from UC Berkeley pressed them on that and said, well, the Deportation Data Project gives us very detailed information that's the source of that is ICE. The source of that is you. And then they will say, well, we don't believe it, or we have different information, or but actually what happened is that it was for a hold room in Baltimore. They ended up threatening to go to court to determine, what data was actually correct. And the day before the court hearing, the ICE attorney canceled the hearing and said, we're not going to argue whether or not this data is correct. Mm-hmm. So it's pretty clear that the data is correct. They're just, and this is happening all over the nation. They're saying that this data is not correct. People are not held there that long, or it includes travel time or something, which is, it's ludicrous.
Eye rolls.
So anyway, they're arguing with their own data, basically.
I read an opinion piece that you did for the Boulder Daily Camera a few weeks ago, a couple months ago maybe, that you found an interesting kind of family parallel. Would you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I assume you're talking about the experience that my father had in a.
I am.
Yeah. So my dad was in the Army battalion that liberated Ohrdruf, which is the very first concentration camp that the Americans found in Germany. And he wrote a very, it was a heartbreaking account of that, the experience that he had as a young soldier. I think he was 21 at the time, coming into this camp, and the smells of dead bodies, seeing dead bodies piled up. And, what it brought to mind for me is the fact that the concentration camps in Germany didn't start out as places where people died or people were killed. They started out, like the detention centers that we've been talking about, where people are held for no reason. These people don't have any criminal background. They're just held. And eventually the conditions get so bad in these camps that people are, ultimately being killed. So yeah, the question, what happened in the Ordruff example was that, which was very poignant for me to read, is that the night after the Americans liberated Ordruff, they went into the local town, found the Burgmeister, which is the mayor, and took him and various townspeople, made them march through this concentration camp where there were stacks of bodies that were deteriorating. And that night, the mayor and his wife both hung themselves because they knew, even though they didn't want to admit it, they knew that something awful was happening there, and they did not do anything to try to stop it.
That would be a pretty motivating story, especially when it comes from your own family. I'm curious if your dad ever talked about it, or if you found writings instead, or both.
I found writings. He did talk about it in his later days. And he told me that he had nightmares every night from that experience. It was, an awful experience for a 21-year-old to go through, as you can imagine.
And this can't help but be part of your motivation, I'm thinking.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think all the time about how we are treating immigrants in our country right now, and the parallels between the Jews and the, disabled people, other people that Hitler put into his basket of deplorables. I think all the time about the parallels and what, we must do everything as a country to make it clear that we will not allow that to happen here.
You mentioned earlier that there are things you think we can do. I'd like you to revisit that and expand a little bit.
You're talking about the hold rooms, to resist the hold rooms. Yeah. So, as an organization, you're based in Jefferson County, I believe. So there aren't any hold rooms, in your area. But bringing attention to the fact that this is happening, that there are these spaces. These are office buildings where people are held and not treated even as good as the detention facility immigrants are treated. So anything that we can do as people in another city to call attention to that, and that could be, contacting. I believe Representative Pedersen is your House member. Yeah, contacting her, asking her specifically to go to these hold rooms and do oversight. Contact Senator Bennett's office. Ask Senator Bennett to go to the hold room. Same with Senator Hickenlooper. Ask them to go and do a surprise oversight visit. And that way ICE doesn't have time to try to clean up their mess before people show up. But writing letters to the editor about these hold rooms, again, that are across, if you want to get more information about it, I encourage you to check out Logan Davis's. He's written several articles about what's happening in these hold rooms across the nation. Write letters to the editor. We do have local immigrant partnership teams in Jefferson County and Arvada and Golden. So you could consider joining those, because we regularly do actions to resist all of the ways that we are treating immigrants. Let me see if I had. Those were the main suggestions.
I know several members of our congregation are on immigrant partnership teams, but you can always use more.
Absolutely.
Advocacy, activism,
Yep.
policy.
I will say that right now we're kind of in a lull in terms of people willing to volunteer. I just had a meeting with our IPT leaders this morning, and they all mentioned that they're having trouble getting people volunteering to help out. We have multiple needs for people to volunteer. So especially if you're willing to actually take action, we would love to have your support.
Why do you imagine is it a lull? Is it because I would think partly it's because there's not been much coverage of big splashy ICE raids. So there may be a mistaken feeling that ICE is backing off. Is that part of it, or what do you think?
Well, I think part of it is, it's summer. People are doing other things. I think definitely they're not the big ICE raids. That's clearly a factor. I also think that you can only listen to so much bad news, perhaps, before you just get demoralized and kind of beaten down, and think that there's nothing you can do as an individual. And in fact, it is as individuals that we can make the most difference. There is so much need for people to help families in Jefferson County with preparing a kit to make sure that if a family member is deported, they are ready for that. There is so much need to spread information about Know Your Rights, because people are what we've observed in the Denver metro area is that the ICE abductions are increasing over the last 2 weeks. I heard about several of them just today. So they're targeting individuals right now rather than the large, mass of ICE agents in the streets like you saw in Minneapolis. But the ICE raids like that are increasing, and we need to do everything we can to support the families that are left, to make sure people understand their rights so that they can try to resist one of those. So, there's multiple volunteering opportunities we have with our immigrant partnership teams.
As you know, and I may have asked you this the last time you were on the podcast, but the faithful resistance, the faithful part of faithful resistance, where do you get that kind of motivation for yourself personally?
My dad's experience is a huge part of that. My grandfather, my dad's father, was also a Presbyterian minister, and we grew up being taught that we have a responsibility for social justice. I also have Quakers in my ancestral background. But for me, it's the right thing to do. I think of the immigrants who are fearful but they don't get a break. It's relentless for them, the fear and the intimidation. And so whatever we can do as people who will not be targeted because we have the right skin color, whatever we can do to try to support them is absolutely our responsibility.
Thank you for all that you do. You put a lot of time and heart into this, and I appreciate it, and hope that others will pursue helping immigrant partnership teams as well. Thank you, Jenna.
Thank you so much.
Okay, I know the 4th of July is in the rearview mirror, but I would like to encourage you to do something that our family and friends did at our holiday barbecue. We read out loud the Declaration of Independence. The list of grievances against King George, the abuses and usurpations, they call them, seems somehow familiar, almost like they could have been written for us in 2026. For example, this was one part that I read when we went around our circle on the 4th. He has erected a multitude of new offices and sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out their substance. If you haven't read the Declaration since you were in maybe grade school, it's fascinating, enlightening, and maybe even motivating. If you have ideas for Faithful Resistance conversations, please email us at faithfulresistance@commonflameuu.org, and keep on doing the next right thing. Go out, do the next right thing.